at an immigration counter inside a fluorescent-lit airport terminal. Power often reveals itself in small gestures. A raised eyebrow, a delayed stamp, a pause meant to remind travelers who controls the gate. On one ordinary morning, an American immigration officer exercised that power casually until a single phone call disrupted the quiet authority of the booth. The traveler was a Filipino passport holder in his early 40s, dressed plainly, carrying only a worn backpack and a neatly organized folder of documents. He had arrived from Manila after a long flight, stepping into the line with practiced patience, aware that the counter was not a place to argue or perform confidence. The officer scanned the passport slowly, eyes lingering on the maroon cover. His expression tightened, not with suspicion, but with boredom edged by disdain. He flipped through the pages longer than necessary, tapping the booklet against the desk, as if weighing its worth before deciding whether it deserved attention. "So what brings you to the United States?" The officer asked, voice flat, already typing before hearing the answer. The Filipino man responded calmly, explaining he was attending a short professional consultation, invited by an American institution. He slid forward an official letter, neatly printed and signed. The officer did not look at the letter immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly and smirked. "You people travel a lot for consultations," he said, making air quotes with his fingers. "You sure this isn't just another way to stay longer than you should?" The words landed softly, but carried weight. The Filipino traveler did not react outwardly. Years of navigating hierarchies had taught him restraint. He simply repeated his answer, pointing gently to the dates on the invitation letter and his confirmed return ticket, both already visible on the counter. The officer chuckled under his breath and finally glanced at the letter, eyes narrowing. "This says you're advising a U.S. research team," he said. "That's interesting. What exactly do you advise Americans on?" The question was framed less as curiosity and more as challenge. "Disaster response coordination," the man replied. His voice was steady, unembellished. He explained his background briefly, mentioning decades of field experience across Southeast Asia. The officer's lips curled slightly, unconvinced, as if expertise was something that could only flow in one direction. Behind them, the line grew longer. Other travelers shifted, sensing tension. The officer deliberately slowed the process, typing, deleting, then typing again. "I'm not sure this adds up," he said aloud, loud enough for others to hear. Filipino passports don't usually match this profile. The Filipino man nodded once, acknowledging the comment without responding to its implication. He stood still, hands visible, posture respectful. Inside, he understood the ritual unfolding. Authority was being tested, asserted, displayed, not because rules required it, but because the moment allowed it. The officer picked up the phone beside his terminal. "I'm going to verify something," he said, eyes fixed on the traveler, as if daring him to protest. The call was placed, not to a supervisor on duty, but to a number listed on the invitation letter's letterhead. As the phone rang, the officer's confidence remained intact. He leaned back again, certain the call would confirm his skepticism. The Filipino traveler waited silently, gaze lowered, not in submission but in patience. He had nothing to add. Everything necessary was already written. The call connected. The officer identified himself brusquely, explaining he was verifying the legitimacy of an invitation. His tone was clipped professional, edged with authority. Then he listened. His posture changed almost imperceptibly as the voice on the other end spoke at length. "Yes, that's correct," the officer replied after a pause. "You're saying he's personally requested?" Another pause followed, longer this time. The officer glanced again at the Filipino man, then back to the monitor, as if recalibrating an internal map of importance. The voice on the phone continued. It belonged to a senior coordinator at a U.S. federal research agency, one the officer recognized immediately. The name carried institutional weight. The Filipino traveler was not merely invited. He was specifically requested for a closed-door advisory session. The officer's expression shifted. The smirk disappeared, replaced by a neutral mask. "Understood," he said quietly. "Yes, I see." He ended the call without ceremony, returning the phone to its cradle with a carefulness absent moments earlier. For several seconds, the booth was silent. The officer reviewed the passport again, this time with precision, checking stamps properly, aligning pages neatly. The power dynamic in the small space had subtly but decisively changed, not through argument, but through confirmation. The officer cleared his throat. "Purpose of visit confirmed," he said, now speaking in standard procedural language. He stamped the passport with a firm, efficient motion. The sound echoed slightly, drawing the attention of nearby travelers who sensed the shift without understanding its source. He slid the passport back across the counter. "Welcome to the United States," he said, voice measured, stripped of earlier mockery. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the remarks made before. Authority rarely explains itself when it retreats. The Filipino traveler accepted the passport with both hands, nodding once. "Thank you," he replied simply. His face showed no triumph. He did not correct the officer or reclaim dignity aloud. The reversal had already occurred quietly, without spectacle. As he walked away from the counter, his pace remained unhurried. He blended into the flow of arriving passengers. Another traveler cleared to enter. No one in the line knew the details, only that something unspoken had settled the moment. Behind the counter, the officer watched him go for a brief second longer than necessary. The booth returned to routine, but the encounter lingered. Not because rules were broken, but because assumptions had been exposed and quietly dismantled. The Filipino man exited the terminal into the open space beyond security, breathing in deeply. He had crossed borders many times before, aware that documents could be read as stories others chose to believe or dismiss. Today, the story spoke for itself. He checked his phone. A message from the hosting agency confirmed his pickup and thanked him again for agreeing to share his experience. The work ahead mattered more than the exchange at the gate. It always had. For him, authority was never something to confront head-on. It was something to endure, outlast, and occasionally educate through quiet presence. His expertise had been earned in places without cameras, without applause, where outcomes mattered more than recognition. At the immigration booth, the reversal had not been dramatic. There was no raised voice, no public reckoning. Just a call, a name, and a realization that value does not announce itself with passports or accents. Airports are thresholds where nations compress themselves into counters and stamps. They reveal how power behaves when it believes it is unquestioned. Sometimes, all it takes is one verified truth to remind it of its limits. The Filipino traveler disappeared into the city beyond the airport, carrying knowledge shaped by typhoons, earthquakes, and human resilience. None of that had been visible at first glance. None of it needed to be defended. At the gate, the officer moved on to the next passport, repeating the ritual. Yet something had shifted subtly, even if unacknowledged. Not every lesson announces itself. Some arrive quietly, like a call that changes the tone of a room. In that small space between glass and counter, authority had been challenged without confrontation, and dignity preserved without display. The stamp had landed the same way it always does, but the meaning behind it had briefly, unmistakably changed.